Lieutenant Declan Hunt had exactly three thoughts every morning when he woke up on Chemos 6. One, that the artificial gravity made his knees ache in ways Earth's natural pull never did. Two, that instant coffee should be classified as a war crime regardless of which species invented it. And three, that training cadets from 16 different species was either the best job in the galaxy or the worst, depending on how much sleep he'd gotten. Today, he'd gotten 5 hours, so it was definitely the worst. "All right, listen up," Declan called out to the assembled group of 20 cadets standing in the staging area of Compound 12, a decommissioned mining complex that had been repurposed, and he used that word generously, into a training facility. This is a standard obstacle course run. You'll navigate through 3 kilometers of tunnels, chambers, and vertical shafts. You'll encounter simulated equipment failures, environmental hazards, and tactical decision points. Your objective is to reach the extraction point on the other side in under 2 hours. A hand shot up. Human hand, which meant it was probably Tilly. And if it was Tilly, it was probably going to be a smart-ass question. "Yes, Tilly," Declan said, not bothering to hide his resignation. "Is it true they found 1,500-year-old mining explosives in these tunnels last month?" Tilly asked, her grin suggesting she already knew the answer and was just stirring the pot. Declan met her eyes with the flat expression he'd perfected over 3 years of dealing with overconfident cadets. "Yes. And is it true they cleared them all out?" "Define cleared," Tilly shot back. "Tilly, I swear." "Lieutenant Hunt speaks truth," interrupted Hux, the Kormathi cadet, whose compound eyes made it impossible to tell where he was actually looking. His voice came out in clicks and whistles, translated by the collar device all non-humanoid species wore. Explosive materials were removed to acceptable safety thresholds per Regulation 9-4 Alpha. Probability of catastrophic detonation is below 0.03%. "Oh well, 0.03%?" Tilly said, throwing her hands up. "Why didn't you say so? I feel so much better now." Dmitri, standing at the back of the group with his arms crossed, spoke up quietly. 0.03% across 3 kilometers is actually a cumulative risk of— "Nobody asked you to do the math, Dmitri," Declan interrupted, because if Dmitri started calculating mortality probabilities, half the cadets would request reassignment. "Everyone's safety equipment is functioning. You've all been briefed. You know the protocols. Worst-case scenario, you hit your emergency beacon and we extract you. This isn't your first run." "It is mine," rumbled Loksuth, the Ukthrani cadet, who stood nearly 8 feet tall and had scales that looked like they could deflect small arms fire. "My species does not fear enclosed spaces or theoretical explosions." "Fantastic," Declan said dryly. "Gold star for you. Everyone else still needs to treat this seriously. You're working in mixed species teams, which means you need to account for different physical capabilities, different environmental tolerances, and different cultural approaches to problem-solving. Hux, you can see in near-total darkness. Loksuth, you can lift 3 times what Tilly can. Dmitri, you can calculate structural integrity by looking at support beams, apparently. Use your advantages. Cover each other's weaknesses. Don't be heroes." He paused, scanning the group. 20 faces, or face equivalents, stared back at him with varying degrees of attention, boredom, and anxiety. This was his 4th training cycle, and he'd learned to read the subtle signs. Tilly was cocky, which would either save her or get her in trouble. Dmitri was nervous, which meant he'd overthink everything. Hux was methodical, already running probability matrices in his head. Loksuth was aggressive, itching to prove Ukthrani superiority. Standard mix, nothing he hadn't handled before. "Equipment check," Declan ordered. Helmet cams on, vitals monitors active, emergency beacons green. Sound off when you're ready. One by one, the cadets confirmed their status. Declan pulled up his datapad, watching the telemetry feeds populate with life signs, camera feeds, and location markers. Everything nominal, everything by the book, which should have been his first warning. "All right," he said, gesturing toward the massive blast doors that led into the complex. "Teams of 4, you've got your assignments. Move out at 30-second intervals. Clock starts when you cross the threshold. And remember, don't be heroes we know." Tilly finished, already jogging toward the entrance with her assigned team. Declan watched them disappear into the dimly lit tunnel beyond, followed by the next team, then the next. Within 3 minutes, all 20 cadets were inside, their location markers spreading out across his tactical display like scattered fireflies. He settled into the observation chair, pulled up the helmet cam feeds, and prepared for 2 hours of watching cadets stumble through basic obstacles while complaining about the smell. Because decommissioned mining complexes on low-budget moons always smelled like rust, mold, and questionable life choices. 15 minutes in, everything was proceeding exactly as expected. Tilly's team had hit the first vertical shaft and was arguing about climbing order. Dimitri's group had stopped to analyze a structural weakness that wasn't actually a weakness. Hux was leading his team through a flooded section with mechanical precision. Loxuth had taken a wrong turn and was too proud to admit it. Typical. Boring. Safe. Declan was actually starting to relax when the first tremor hit. It wasn't much, just a vibration that rattled his coffee mug against the desk. He frowned, checking the seismic monitors. Chemos 6 wasn't geologically active. The ITE moon was supposed to be stable, which was why they'd put the academy here in the first place. The monitors showed nothing unusual. "Probably just a transport landing heavy," he muttered, returning his attention to the feeds. Then the second tremor hit, stronger this time, and one of the helmet cams went dark. Declan sat up straight. "Command, this is Lieutenant Hunt at Compound 12. I'm registering seismic activity and loss of signal from Cadet. Checking Cadet Novak. Please confirm." Static answered him. "Command, do you copy?" More static. A third tremor, and this time he didn't need monitors to tell him something was catastrophically wrong. This wasn't a tremor. This was an explosion. Multiple explosions, rippling through the complex in a chain reaction that turned 0.03% into 100% in the span of 3 seconds. His tactical display lit up like a nightmare. Location markers went red. Vitals spiked. Helmet cams showed nothing but dust, debris, and chaos. Emergency beacons started screaming, a dozen high-pitched alarms that meant cadets were injured, trapped, or both. And the communications array was completely dead. Declan was moving before conscious thought caught up with instinct. He grabbed the emergency response kit from the wall, checked his own beacon, and hit the manual override on the blast doors. They groaned open halfway, debris already piling up on the other side, and he squeezed through into darkness thick with dust and the metallic taste of blood. His headlamp cut through the haze, illuminating a tunnel that looked nothing like it had 15 minutes ago. Support beams had collapsed. Ceiling panels hung at dangerous angles, and somewhere in the distance he could hear screaming. Multiple voices. Multiple species. Pure terror in a universal language. Declan pulled up his datapad, hands shaking as he tried to get a clear picture of the situation. 8 cadets were still transmitting vitals and location. That meant 12 were either dead or their equipment was destroyed, and he had no way of knowing which. The active signals were scattered across a half-kilometer radius, most of them buried under structural collapses. He had maybe 20 minutes before secondary failures brought the entire complex down. No backup, no support, no way to call for help. Just him, 8 signals, and rapidly deteriorating odds. "Okay," he said to nobody, his voice steady despite the spike of adrenaline turning his hands cold. "Okay, closest signal first. Work the problem." He ran. Tilly's beacon was 200 meters in, past a collapsed archway, and through a chamber that had partially flooded when a water main ruptured. Declan waded through chest-high water that stank of minerals and decay, his headlamp catching glimpses of floating debris and things he didn't want to identify. Her signal was strong, which meant she was conscious, but she wasn't moving, which meant she was trapped. He found her pinned under a Cadets support beam, her leg bent at an angle that made his stomach turn. Her face was gray with shock, and when she saw him, she actually laughed, a sound halfway between relief and hysteria. 0.03%, she gasped. "You owe me an apology." "Later," Declan said, dropping to his knees beside her and assessing the beam. Maybe 500 pounds, reinforced alloy, and wedged against another piece of debris in a way that meant moving, it would bring down more ceiling. Fantastic. He braced himself, found the angle that would shift the weight without causing a collapse, and heaved. His back screamed. His shoulders burned. Something in his chest made a popping sound that couldn't possibly be good. But the beam shifted. "Move," he grunted, and Tilly dragged herself free with a scream that echoed through the chamber. Declan lowered the beam carefully, then scooped Tilly up in a fireman's carry that made her scream again. I know. I'm sorry. My leg is broken in like 6 places. I know. This really hurts. I know." He carried her back through the flooded chamber, up through the collapsed archway, and deposited her in a stable section near the entrance. Her vitals were bad but not critical. The leg would need surgery, but she'd live. "Stay here," he ordered. "Do not move. Do not try to be helpful. Just stay alive until I get back." "There are others?" Tilly asked, her voice small. 8 signals, maybe more if their equipment's just damaged. "You can't," she started, but he was already running back into the complex. Dimitri was deeper in, trapped in a chamber that had completely collapsed on top of him. Declan spent 8 minutes he couldn't afford digging through rubble with his bare hands, following the sound of shallow breathing and the weak pulse of a fading beacon. When he finally uncovered Dimitri's face, the kid was unconscious, barely breathing, and bleeding from a head wound that looked severe. No time for careful extraction. No time for proper medical assessment. Declan pulled him free, slung him over his shoulder, and ran. 2 down. 6 to go. 15 minutes left. Maybe less. Hux was in the flooded section, trapped in a chamber where the water was rising fast. By the time Declan reached him, the Kormathi was clinging to the ceiling, his breathing apparatus failing, his translated voice cutting in and out with panic. "Cannot swim. Species. Not adapted." Declan dove under, found the debris trapping Hux's lower body, and pulled until his lungs burned and his vision started to darken. When Hux came free, Declan dragged him to the surface and hauled him toward safety, his own body running on nothing but adrenaline and stubbornness. 3 down. The complex groaned around him, the sound of metal fatigue and imminent structural failure. Aftershocks continued to rattle the tunnels. Dust fell in constant streams, and Declan kept running, kept pulling cadets from the wreckage, kept ignoring the pain that was rapidly spreading through his entire body. Somewhere around the 5th rescue, he realized his ribs were broken. Around the 6th, he noticed he was leaving bloody footprints. By the time he dragged Loxoth, unconscious and buried under 3 meters of collapsed tunnel, to the safe zone, he could barely see straight. but he could still count. 8 cadets in the safe zone. 12 more signals that had gone dark. He had to check. Had to be sure. Declan stumbled back into the complex, his vision swimming, his body screaming at him to stop. He found 2 more cadets, dead on arrival, their vitals monitors flat. He found equipment scattered in the wreckage, explaining some of the lost signals. He found 3 more survivors, injured but mobile, and herded them toward the exit. 11 accounted for. 9 more missing. He was searching for the 12th when the complex began its final collapse. The sound was apocalyptic, a grinding, shrieking roar of metal and stone giving up the fight against gravity. Declan looked up and saw the ceiling coming down in a wave of destruction that was going to bury him and anyone still trapped inside. He ran for the exit, his body moving on autopilot, every step agony. Behind him, the complex folded in on itself like a dying star. Ahead, he could see the blast doors, still partially open, light streaming through. He was going to make it. Probably. Maybe. Then he saw movement in the wreckage to his left. A cadet, pinned and struggling. Loxuth's teammate, a Ukthrani named Kesh, trapped under debris and unable to reach the emergency beacon that had been knocked from his belt. Declan didn't think, didn't calculate, didn't weigh the odds. He just changed direction and dove for Kesh. The ceiling came down as he pulled the cadet free. Something massive and metal struck Declan across the back, driving him to his knees. Pain exploded through his spine, his legs, his entire body. But he kept moving, kept dragging Kesh toward the light, even as his vision tunneled and his hearing faded to a high-pitched whine. They made it through the blast doors just as the complex completed its collapse. 300,000 tons of rock and metal settling into a tomb that would have held 13 lives if Declan had made one different choice. He fell to his knees in the staging area, released Kesh, and looked up to see rescue teams swarming the area. Must have gotten through on emergency channels, must have seen the seismic activity. Tilly was crying. Dmitri was being loaded onto a stretcher. Hux was clicking something in his native language that the translator couldn't parse. And all 8 cadets he'd pulled from the wreckage were alive. All 8. Declan tried to stand, couldn't, and realized with detached curiosity that he couldn't feel his legs anymore. Probably not good. Definitely not good. His vision was darkening at the edges, his hearing reduced to a distant rushing sound like ocean waves. He saw a medical team running toward him, saw someone, maybe Hollis from the Academy Medical Wing, shouting orders he couldn't hear. His last thought before darkness took him was a number. 8. He'd saved 8. And then Lieutenant Declan Hunt, who'd just done the most extraordinary thing witnessed in living memory, collapsed into unconsciousness with absolutely no idea that he'd changed the course of galactic history. Which, honestly, was probably for the best, because if he'd known what was coming, he would have stayed unconscious. Consciousness returned in fragments. Pain first, naturally, because the universe had a sense of humor. Then sounds, rhythmic beeping, hushed voices, the hum of medical equipment. Then smell. Antiseptic, recycled air, something vaguely medicinal that burned his sinuses. Declan tried to open his eyes and immediately regretted it. Lights. Bright, invasive, definitely designed by someone who hates people. Lights. Easy, said a voice. Human voice. Male. Familiar. Don't try to move yet. Hollis, Declan croaked, his throat feeling like he'd gargled sandpaper. Yeah, it's me. Dr. Hollis appeared in his limited field of vision, holding some kind of scanning device. Welcome back to the land of the living. You've been out for 6 months. Declan's brain stuttered on that number. 6. What? Months. As in half a year. As in you've missed 2 seasons, 3 major holidays, and approximately 200 get-well-soon messages from species you've never even heard of. The Cadets, Declan managed, ignoring everything else. Did they? All 8 survived, Hollis interrupted, his expression softening. Tilly's got a permanent limp and 3 prosthetic bones in her leg. Dimitri had a skull fracture that required nano-reconstruction. Hux spent a month in a specialized respiratory unit. But they all lived, Declan. Every single one you pulled out. The relief hit harder than the pain. Declan closed his eyes, letting the information settle. 8 for 8. Perfect score. Not bad for a routine training exercise gone catastrophically wrong. What about me? He asked, because his body felt wrong in ways he couldn't quite identify. Hollis pulled up a holographic display, and Declan's medical scan appeared in 3-dimensional glory. Even with limited medical knowledge, he could tell it looked bad. Really bad. Sections highlighted in red, warnings clustered around his spine and internal organs. You had 4 broken ribs, a collapsed lung, severe internal bleeding, a fractured spine in 2 places, and damage to your lower spinal cord that should have left you paralyzed from the waist down, Hollis said clinically. We had to reconstruct your left kidney, reinforce your spine with cybernetic supports, and use Kormathi nerve grafting techniques to restore function to your legs. You died twice on the operating table. We brought you back both times. Declan processed this with the numb detachment of someone who'd just been told their body was essentially held, together with advanced technology and stubborn refusal to quit. So I'm, what, part robot now? About 8% cybernetic, give or take. Hollis managed a weak smile. You'll set off some metal detectors, but you'll walk again. Eventually. Great, Declan muttered. Can I go back to sleep now? Absolutely not. Hollis's expression shifted to something Declan couldn't quite read. Concern mixed with amusement? Because you need to understand what happened after you passed out. I passed out. You fixed me. What else is there? Hollis laughed. Actually laughed. Oh, buddy, you have no idea. Over the next hour, Hollis explained. The helmet cameras had captured everything. Every rescue, every decision, every moment Declan had chosen to go back instead of saving himself. The footage had been reviewed by Academy officials, then medical boards, then safety committees, and then someone had leaked it to the galactic networks. It went viral, Hollis said, pulling up his datapad to show Declan the view counts. Numbers that didn't make sense. Billions. Every species network picked it up. Xenopsychologists started analyzing your behavior. Cultural anthropologists wrote papers. You became a case study in 17 different academic disciplines. That's... Declan struggled for words. That's horrible. It gets better, or worse, depending on your perspective. Hollis swiped through screens. The Kormathi Council declared your actions an example of irrational compassion excellence. It's now a required viewing in their military academies. The Ukthrani, you know how aggressive and individualistic they are? They created a new philosophical concept based on what you did. They call it Hunt's Theorem. Declan stared at him. They named a theorem after me? About choosing group survival over personal logic. About extending pack bonding behavior to other species even when it violates self-preservation instincts. Hollis was grinning now, clearly enjoying Declan's mounting horror. You broke their entire worldview. They're still arguing about the implications. I just did my job. Nobody else saw it that way. Hollis leaned forward. You had 12 chances to stop. 12 moments where the logical choice, the survival choice, was to get out and save yourself. You didn't take any of them. You kept going back. And other species. They don't do that, Declan. Not for individuals outside their genetic line. Not when the math says they'll die trying. Declan wanted to argue, to explain that it wasn't special or extraordinary. But his ribs hurt, his head hurt, and apparently his spine was partially synthetic now. So maybe Hollis had a point about the whole nearly dying thing. There's more, Hollis said quietly. How could there possibly be more? Tilly wants to visit. So does Dimitri, and Hux, and about 6 others. They've been waiting months for you to wake up. Something uncomfortable twisted in Declan's chest, the organic part, hopefully. I don't need... Yeah, well, they do. Hollis stood, preparing to leave. Get some rest. Physical therapy starts tomorrow. And Declan? What? You might want to mentally prepare yourself, because this story doesn't end with you waking up in a medical bay. Tilly visited first, 3 days after Declan regained consciousness. She walked with a pronounced limp, leaning on a cane that looked like it had been custom-made from some kind of iridescent alloy. When she saw him sitting up in bed, actually conscious and coherent, she stopped in the doorway and just stared. You look terrible, she finally said. Thanks, Declan replied. You look like you robbed a fancy cane store. She laughed, and the sound was different from the cocky cadet he remembered. Older somehow, weighted with things she shouldn't have had to carry at 19. She crossed the room and sat in the visitor's chair, setting the cane aside carefully. Kormathi design, she said, noticing his glance. Gift from Hux's family. Apparently saving their son's life means I get premium mobility aids for the rest of mine. How's the leg? Functional. Hurts when it rains, which is hilarious because we're on a space station. She picked at a thread on her uniform. Commissioned officer uniform, Declan noticed. She'd graduated. I finished training. Top of my class, actually. Turns out, nearly dying gives you perspective on priorities. Tilly, don't. She held up a hand. Don't apologize. Don't say you were just doing your job. I've heard the speeches, read the analyses, watched the footage about 50 times. I know exactly what you did, and why it was statistically insane. Declan shifted uncomfortably, his cybernetic spine making small, whirring sounds that he desperately hoped would go away eventually. Then why are you here? Because you need to understand what happened after. Tilly pulled out her datapad, swiped through to something, and turned it to face him. This is the Galactic News Network. Top story for 3 months straight. That's your face. And it was. Frozen footage from a helmet cam, Declan's face streaked with blood and dust, eyes wild, dragging Dimitri through collapsed rubble. The headline read, Human Instructor Defies Death 8 Times. Xenopsychologists baffled. I hate that picture, Declan muttered. Everyone else loves it. It's been turned into paintings, sculptures, holographic installations. There's a street on Kormath Prime named after you. The Ukthrani Embassy has a statue. She kept swiping. But that's just surface stuff. What matters is what it changed. She pulled up academic papers, hundreds of them, all analyzing the incident from different angles. Evolutionary biology papers, examining human pack bonding. Game theory analyses, trying to explain the decision matrix. Xenopsychology journals dedicated entirely to what they were calling the Hunt Paradox. This one's my favorite, Tilly said, opening a particularly dense-looking document. It's from a Kormathi philosopher, arguing that your actions prove emotion is superior to logic in crisis situations. It caused a schism in their entire cultural framework. They've been debating it for months. Declan rubbed his face. That's not... I didn't mean to cause a philosophical crisis. Too late. You also caused a political one. She pulled up another file. The Ukthrani Council spent 6 weeks analyzing your choices. Their culture is built on individual strength and genetic supremacy. The idea that you would risk death for beings not genetically related to you, including Ukathrani cadets, fundamentally challenged their worldview. What did they conclude? That humans are dangerously irrational and potentially valuable allies specifically because of that irrationality. Tilly grinned. You made us strategically important by being stupid. I wasn't being stupid. You went back into a collapsing building 12 times. It was a mine. Declan. Tilly's voice went soft. You saved my life. You saved 8 lives. And, yeah, maybe it was irrational. Maybe the math said you should have gotten out after the first rescue or the second. But you didn't. And that choice rippled out in ways you can't imagine. She stood, retrieving her cane. Dimitri's coming tomorrow. He'll explain the academic side better than I can. Hux wants to visit after that. And then... She paused at the door. Then there are some people from Earth who need to talk to you. What people? Important ones. She smiled. Get some rest, Lieutenant. You're going to need it. Dimitri arrived the next morning, carrying a tablet thick with documentation and wearing the haunted expression of someone who'd spent too long thinking about their own mortality. He sat down without preamble and immediately launched into what was clearly a prepared presentation. I've compiled data from 216 academic sources, 43 news networks, and 18 governmental bodies, he said, pulling up holographic charts that filled the air between them. The incident has been analyzed from every conceivable angle. I thought you should see the conclusions. Dimitri, you don't have to. You died for 1.6 minutes during my extraction, Dimitri interrupted, his voice flat. Your heart stopped because you were carrying me through a collapsed tunnel with 4 broken ribs and internal bleeding. The medical report says you should have stopped after Tilly. That was the logical limit of human endurance. He swiped to another chart. This tracks the decision points where you could have withdrawn. 12 total opportunities. Each one represented a choice between personal survival and returning to the danger zone. Statistical models suggest the probability of successful extraction decreased by 8.3% with each subsequent rescue attempt. I didn't do the math at the time, Declan said dryly. Exactly. Dimitri looked up, and his eyes were intense. That's what makes it significant. You operated on instinct, emotion, and irrational human stubbornness, and you achieved a 100% success rate on cadet survival, which no model predicted. He pulled up a new document, this one dense with equations. This is from a Kormathi game theorist. She argues that human decision-making in crisis situations defies rational actor theory. We don't optimize for individual survival. We optimize for group survival even when we're not genetically related to the group. Humans are social. Not like this. Dimitri stood, pacing. Other social species protect their genetic relatives or tribe members. You protected cadets from 4 different species, including 2 species that humanity has historically had conflicts with. The Ukthrani nearly went to war with Earth 15 years ago. You nearly died saving Loxoth. Declan hadn't actually thought about that. Loxoth's people had killed 3,000 humans in a border dispute, and he'd gone back for him anyway. The political implications are massive, Dimitri continued. Alliance requests have tripled. Species that saw humans as aggressive and unpredictable now see us as loyal and protective. Our position in the Galactic Council has shifted. Because I dragged some cadets out of a collapsed mine. Because you proved humans will protect their allies, even at lethal cost to themselves. Dmitri stopped pacing. That's valuable, Declan. That changes diplomatic calculations across the entire galaxy. He pulled up one final document, and this one made Declan's stomach drop. It was an official seal, Earth's governmental header. You've been nominated for induction into humanity's honor archives, Dmitri said quietly. The council vote is in 2 weeks. It's expected to pass unanimously. The what? The honor archives. It's a record kept by the Galactic Council of the most significant acts of valor performed by each species. Humans have had exactly 198 individuals inducted since we joined the Council 80 years ago. Declan stared at the document. His name was there, in official text, alongside words like extraordinary valor and interspecies sacrifice and cultural significance. I was just doing my job. Nobody else sees it that way. Dmitri sat back down. Hollis told you the footage went viral. What he didn't mention is that it's mandatory viewing now in 16 different species military academies. You're a case study in crisis leadership. Children learn about you in school. That's insane. That's reality. Dmitri managed a small smile. You're a legend, Declan. You just haven't accepted it yet. Hux visited that afternoon, his compound eyes reflecting the medical bay's harsh lights in kaleidoscope patterns. He stood at the foot of the bed for a long moment, his breathing apparatus clicking softly. In my culture, he finally said, his translated voice carrying unusual weight, logic is sacred. Emotion is weakness. We calculate optimal outcomes and act accordingly. I know, Declan said. You defied every calculation. Every optimal choice pointed to your withdrawal after the second rescue. Probability of survival decreased exponentially with each attempt. By the 8th rescue, your chance of survival was below 2%. I didn't know that at the time. That is precisely why your actions are significant. Hux moved closer. You operated without calculation, without optimization, without regard for probability matrices. You simply acted, and you achieved the impossible. He pulled something from his pack, a small crystalline object that pulsed with soft blue light. This is a thought crystal, a Kormathi cultural artifact. We encode important philosophical concepts in them for meditation and study. This one contains the complete analysis of your actions that day. It is being studied by every Kormathi student of philosophy and logic. Hux set it on the bedside table. You broke our certainty that logic is superior to emotion. You proved that irrational compassion can achieve outcomes that rational calculation cannot. That revelation has caused chaos in my culture's foundational beliefs. I'm sorry. Do not apologize. Chaos breeds growth. You have given us something precious. Doubt in our own certainty. Hux's translated voice carried something that might have been gratitude. Thank you for saving my life. Thank you for teaching my entire species that we do not have all the answers. After Hux left, Declan sat in the medical bay, staring at the thought crystal and the documents Dmitri had left behind. His name, repeated over and over in academic papers and news reports and governmental documents. His face, frozen in moments of terror and determination. His choices, analyzed and debated across the galaxy. He'd just wanted to get the cadets out safely. How had that turned into this? The people from Earth arrived on a morning when Declan was attempting physical therapy and failing spectacularly. His cybernetic spine worked fine. Great, even. Better than the original equipment, but his brain kept forgetting that his legs needed different commands now. He'd managed 3 steps before his knee buckled and deposited him back in the wheelchair. "Progress," Hollis had said cheerfully. "I hate you," Declan had replied. That's when Ambassador Kurukma entered the medical bay, flanked by 2 human officials in formal diplomatic dress. The Oxcali ambassador stood nearly 9 feet tall, with crystalline skin that refracted light into rainbow patterns and 6 manipulator appendages that moved with unsettling grace. "Lieutenant Declan," Kurukma said, their voice carrying harmonics that human ears couldn't fully process. "We need to discuss your future." Declan, still sitting in his wheelchair and wearing medical scrubs that had seen better days, felt supremely unprepared for whatever this conversation was going to be. "Can it wait until I can walk?" "No," said one of the human officials, a stern woman with iron-gray hair. "I'm Undersecretary Mbeki from Earth's Diplomatic Corps. This is Director Torres from the Intelligence Bureau. We need to brief you on the situation." "What situation?" Kurukma gestured, and a holographic display materialized in the center of the room. It showed the Galactic Council chambers, that massive amphitheater where representatives from 200 species debated policy and law. 3 weeks ago, Kurukma began, the Council convened an emergency session to discuss what they are calling the Declan Incident. That is what you are now known as in official documentation. I'm an incident? You are a diplomatic crisis and an opportunity simultaneously. Mbeki pulled up footage. Declan's rescue, played on the Council's main screens, watched by thousands of delegates. Your actions have fundamentally shifted how other species perceive humanity. Prior to this, we were seen as aggressive, territorial, and unreliable. Useful in combat situations, but difficult as long-term allies. And now, Torres said, 16 species have requested formal alliance negotiations. 8 others have proposed joint military training programs. The Kormathi want to establish cultural exchange initiatives. Even the Ukthrani, who nearly went to war with us, have extended diplomatic overtures. Kurukma's crystalline features somehow conveyed satisfaction. You have achieved what decades of traditional diplomacy could not. You have made humanity valuable not despite your irrationality, but because of it. Declan processed this, his brain still catching up. You're saying I accidentally improved Earth's galactic standing by almost dying? Precisely. Kurukma shifted their manipulator appendages in what might have been their species' equivalent of a shrug. Other species now understand that humans will protect their allies irrationally, loyally, and at tremendous personal cost. That is strategically valuable. It makes you trustworthy in ways that rational actors can never be. Because rational actors optimize for self-preservation, Torres added. You proved humans don't. That changes every alliance calculation in the galaxy. Mbeki pulled up another document, the one Dmitri had shown him. The Honor Archives induction is scheduled for next month on Earth. You'll need to attend. I can barely walk. You have 4 weeks. Medical says you'll be mobile by then. Her expression softened slightly. I know this is overwhelming, but you need to understand the scope. This isn't just about you. It's about what you represent. I represent bad decision-making and broken ribs. You represent humanity's greatest strength, Kurukma said. The willingness to act illogically in service of others. The refusal to abandon those you've sworn to protect, even when logic demands it. The ambassador moved closer, their rainbow skin casting colored light across the medical bay. In my culture, we have a concept, Muthkala. It means one who changes the current. You are Muthkala, Declan. Your actions have altered the flow of galactic politics in ways we are still measuring. I just wanted to get the cadets out. Yes, that simplicity is what makes it powerful. Kurukma gestured to the holographic display, changing it to show data streams, alliance requests, trade negotiations, cultural exchanges, all time-stamped after the incident. You demonstrated pure motive. No calculation, no political agenda, just the imperative to protect. Other species find that compelling. Torres leaned forward. Which brings us to the actual reason we're here. The Honor Archive's induction is going to be a massive political event. Every major species will send representatives. It's not just a ceremony. It's a statement about humanity's role in the galaxy. No pressure, Declan muttered. Immense pressure, Mbeki corrected. You'll need to give a speech. Brief, but significant. We have writers preparing. No. All three visitors stared at him. No speeches written by committee, Declan said. If I have to do this, I'll say what I actually think, not what's politically optimal. Mbeki and Torres exchanged glances. Kurukma's harmonics shifted to what might have been amusement. That is acceptable, the ambassador said. In fact, it is preferable. Your authenticity is your value. 4 weeks later, Declan actually stood, on his own 2 cybernetically enhanced legs, in front of the Honor Archive's monument on Earth. It was a crystalline structure 300 feet tall, shot through with light that represented each inducted individual. His name had been etched into the base that morning, alongside 198 others. The ceremony was smaller than he'd feared, but larger than he'd hoped. Representatives from 40 species filled the plaza. Tilly stood in the front row, wearing her dress uniform and leaning on her fancy cane. Dimitri was there, looking uncomfortable in formal wear. Hux had traveled from Cormath Prime specifically for this. And Loxeth stood near the back, the massive Ukthrani warrior watching with unreadable reptilian eyes. The speeches before Declan's had been predictably political. Mbeki talked about human-alien cooperation. A Cormathi philosopher discussed the intersection of emotion and logic. An Ukathrani military commander spoke about strength redefined. Then it was Declan's turn. He approached the podium, his gait still slightly uneven, his spine making soft mechanical sounds that the microphones probably picked up. He looked out at the assembled crowd, aliens and humans, warriors and diplomats, the cadets he'd saved, and the officials who'd turned his panic-driven choices into political capital. I'm not good at speeches, he began, and I'm really not good at being a symbol. So I'm going to say this once, and then I'd appreciate it if everyone could go back to treating me like a regular person. Scattered laughter. Good sign. 6 months ago, I was doing my job. Training exercise went bad. People were trapped. I went in and got them out. That's not heroism. That's basic human decency. We don't leave people behind. We don't do the math on whether a rescue is worth the risk. We don't leave people behind. He paused, finding Tilly in the crowd. I've been told my actions were irrational, statistically unsound, evolutionarily questionable. And you know what? Everyone's probably right. I should have stopped after the first rescue, maybe the second. The numbers said I was going to die. But here's what the numbers don't account for. I couldn't live with myself if I didn't try. Not because I'm special or heroic or whatever these speeches have been saying. Because I'm human, and humans are built wrong for a rational universe. We get attached to people. We form bonds with beings who don't share our genetics. We take stupid risks for individuals we barely know. He looked at Hux. We teach species who worship logic that emotion has value. Then at Loxuth, we show species who prize individual strength that collective protection is its own kind of power. Declan gripped the podium, his rebuilt spine holding firm. I didn't mean to cause diplomatic incidents or philosophical crises or political realignments. I just couldn't leave those kids in the rubble. That's not heroism. That's just being human. And if that makes us valuable allies, then great. But it also means you should understand what you're getting into. Because we will drag you to safety, whether you want us to or not. We will come back for you when logic says to retreat. We will break our bodies pulling you from wreckage. And we will complain about it the entire time. And we will absolutely refuse to be thanked for it afterward. More laughter now, and Declan felt some of the tension ease. So, yeah, put my name in the archives if you want. But remember, it's not just my name. It's 8 cadets who lived because humanity is too stubborn to accept acceptable losses. It's a species that does stupid, irrational, mathematically inadvisable things. Because we decided a long time ago that people matter more than probability. He stepped back from the podium. That's all I've got. Can I sit down now? My legs hurt. The applause was immediate and overwhelming. Kurukma's harmonics created a resonance that other species picked up. Even Loxuth made a sound that might have been approval. As Declan returned to his seat, Tilly caught his eye and grinned. Dimitri gave a subtle nod. Hux's compound eyes reflected the archive's light in patterns that looked almost like pride. That evening, after the ceremony and the formal reception and the endless rounds of diplomatic handshakes, Declan found himself alone in the archive's meditation garden. His name glowed softly on the monument behind him, etched in crystalline permanence. He thought about the 8 cadets, all alive and thriving, about the policy changes his incident had triggered, better safety protocols, improved emergency systems, reforms that would protect thousands of future trainees, about the philosophical debates and political shifts and cultural exchanges that had rippled out from one man's refusal to accept acceptable losses. His datapad buzzed. Message from Mbeki. You've been cleared to return to duty. Hemos 6 Academy wants you back as senior instructor. New facilities, full funding, state-of-the-art safety systems. Interested? Declan smiled and typed his response. When do I start? Because speeches were fine, and monuments were nice. But cadets needed training, and someone had to teach the next generation that sometimes the irrational choice was the only choice worth making. He stood, still a bit unsteady, still partially synthetic, still human in all the ways that mattered, and walked toward the transport station. Behind him, the archive's monument glowed with his name among Earth's honored. Ahead of him, another group of cadets waited to learn that acceptable losses were never acceptable. And somewhere in the galaxy, species that had built civilizations on logic and calculation tried to understand the species that built theirs on stubborn, irrational compassion. They'd figure it out eventually. Humans would make sure of it, complaining the entire way.